It all started when my wife died 8 months ago. Susan was everything to me. We'd been together since high school, and it had been love at first sight. We married after graduation, and we spent 18 years together in wedded bliss. I worked as a writer, finding jobs in editing or column writing. Susan working as a receptionist for a friend of my mother's. We spent a lot of time together. My days spent mostly waiting for her to come home. I lived for the moments when we were sitting in front of the TV together or curled up in bed as we talked about our day. We never had children, though it wasn't for a lack of trying. I was afraid she would leave me when she discovered I was infertile. I'd been injured when I was small, but she just smiled and said we'd just have to be satisfied with each other. It was never something we struggled with. Instead of kids, we gave each other our full attention. We traveled as often as we could, ate out often, had date nights at least once a week, and loved each other more than anyone else we knew. Susan was my everything, and I hoped I was hers. She never gave me any doubt that it was so, and those 18 years were the happiest time of my life. They weren't enough, though. 1,000,000 years wouldn't have been enough. I was writing something for some rag that Susan liked to read when I got the call. She had looked over my shoulder that morning before she left, cooing appreciatively as I edited a piece from one of her favorite writers, other than me, of course. She wanted to read it when I was done, and I promised I'd let her see it when she got home. I'd been invited to write a column, too, something they might let me do more often if it did well, and I'd just started fleshing it out when I decided it was time for a second cup of coffee. The coffee maker was burbling happily, filling my mug with liquid happiness, when my phone rang. Thought it might be Susan, letting me know she had made it to work, and I almost didn't answer when I saw it was an unknown number. The telemarketers had been particularly bad lately, and the last thing I wanted was another conversation with someone who wanted to sell me solar panels or extend the warranty on my car. Turned out it was the police. There'd been an accident. They were sorry, but she had passed very quickly, likely instantly, and hadn't felt any pain. My cup smashed as it hit the floor, soaking my feet in hot coffee as I gripped the counter for support. I would need support for the next few months. I was a wreck. My wife had been my whole world, and suddenly I was alone. I couldn't even go into the bedroom for the first 2 weeks. It smelled like her. Her pictures were everywhere. I slept on the couch a lot those days. I didn't even go in there to get my suit. I just bought a new one off the rack for the funeral. It was small. Neither of us had a lot of friends or family, but the girls from the doctor's office were very supportive, very sorry to lose such a dear friend. We buried her in Mountain Hills, a cemetery not far from the house. After they lowered her into the ground, I just sat there, trying to figure out what to do. I was still sitting there when the guys from the funeral home came to pick up the chairs, the sun setting behind me as I watched the hole in the ground where my wife now lay. "Sorry for your loss, mister, but we gotta pack these up now." I just got up and drove home, finding myself sitting on the couch. When the sun came up, I was still sitting there. This became a pattern. The next 2 months are kind of a blur, honestly. I lived my life like that quote from Forrest Gump. When I was tired, I slept. When I was hungry, I ate. And when I had to go, I went. I really didn't leave the house unless I had to, and When I did, I walked. I didn't trust cars after that, and I'm still not comfortable riding in anything with wheels. The walks probably did me good, but I was so lost at that point in my life. She'd been my everything, my whole world, and I just didn't know how to get by without her. I didn't work. My contracts quickly dried up. I wasn't working on my book either, and I'd fallen into a deep funk. If something hadn't pulled me out, I would have probably wasted away right there. Luckily, I suppose, something did. That was when the gifts started showing up. The first one came on Valentine's Day, though I now know that was no accident. I had stepped out in the evening to check the mail, and there it was on the stoop. I almost stepped on it, and that would have been a shame because someone had left my favorites. Sitting there was a bouquet of wildflowers, a box of those dark chocolate truffles Susan had always bought me, and a card. I was stunned for a moment, not quite believing what I was seeing. This was just the sort of thing she would do, too, and I expected her to jump around the corner and surprise me. She hadn't been very large, a wisp of a thing, but she liked to scare people and found it hilarious when she managed to. As the minutes stretched by and no scare seemed incoming, I picked up the stuff and brought it inside. I put the flowers in some water. I had never gotten flowers before, but I remembered that much, and set the chocolates on the table. I opened the card and found a pretty generic card inside, flipping it open to see who had sent it. I snorted as I read it, wondering whose bright idea that had been, but feeling a little better, nonetheless. "From your secret admirer" was written inside, the handwriting fine and spidery, just like hers had always been. As I ate the chocolates, I felt the tears come on unbidden. The taste, the smell, it all reminded me of Valentine's days past. We would sit and watch a movie, curled up on the couch together, while she munched at her Ferrero Rochers and I ate my chocolate truffles. We'd trade sometimes, and I wish now that I could see her eyes light up as I handed her one of my chocolates again. I passed out on the couch a little later, but my dreams were a little brighter that night. After that, I started finding other gifts. Food from my favorite Chinese place, candy, books by writers that I liked. One time, someone even delivered a seafood feast from Sir Crabbington's, and I was halfway through it before I realized it was mine and Susan's wedding anniversary. I waited till after I'd finished before crying this time, but the tears were still there. I never questioned these gifts, but I never looked for them either. I assumed they were from friends or from the girls at the office she had worked at, but their dedication was heartwarming if it was. My wife must have talked about me a lot for them to know my favorite foods and snacks, and I was honestly just happy for a break in the sadness. Each of these gifts made my day a little better, and the pain ebbed away a little more with each new package. Suddenly I was feeling inspired to write again. I had the energy to reach out to my old contacts and try to work. I was running in the evenings. I was doing laundry and dishes, and felt like I might be getting a little better. The gifts were nice, but it was the other things that started to make me wonder if the gifts were all that was being given. Sometimes I would wake up to find that the clothes were folded or the dishes were already done, and I couldn't remember having done them. Other times it would be simpler things easily explained but no less odd. A blanket thrown across me where there hadn't been one before. A pillow under my head when I had slept on the couch and left it in the bed. Sometimes as I came awake a little in the night, it seemed like I could see shadows moving in my house. I would sit up, the living room bathed in the light of whatever TV show I had fallen asleep watching, and look around for the source of the movement, finding nothing. It was weird, but I figured it was probably just my imagination. I'd been through a lot lately, so mild hallucinations might be expected. It was on one of my jogs when I finally discovered the identity of my secret admirer. I was coming up the hallway, huffing a little from a longer jog than usual tonight, when I saw someone leaving something outside my door. I had to grab the wall for a minute when I first saw her because I thought it might be my wife. She was short, with brown hair that had been cut into a pixie cut. She was dressed normally enough in jeans and a t-shirt, but the high tops were also something that my wife favored. From the back, she looked exactly like my dead wife, except for the hair. My wife had always talked about getting it cut short, but she favored ponytails and braids too much to ever cut it too short. She was bent at the waist, leaving food or something for me, and when I called her name, she jumped. When she turned around, though, I could see that I'd been mistaken. The woman was similar, but her face was different. They could have been sisters, but there were definitely subtle differences. Her nose was rounder, her face less angular, and she just seemed less substantial. I began to wonder if she might be a cousin or something, but I couldn't think of anyone in Susan's family who looked much like her. "Oh my gosh," she said, looking embarrassed. "I guess you caught me. Sorry for being so mysterious. I just didn't want to mess up your morning. I was a friend of your wife's. My name's Anne." She offered me a hand to shake, and I likely looked just as unsure of myself as I took it. I told her to knock next time and come and share a meal with me. She agreed. That began our strange friendship. Anne was just the companion I needed, and we spent 2 or 3 nights a week in my living room. Some of you will lift an eyebrow at that, but it was never anything more than talk. Anne cried as often as I did, and the two of us reminisced over Susan and what she had meant to us. Anne, as it turned out, had known her far longer than I had. The two had been friends since they were children, and Anne told me about Susan's early life in a way that made them almost sound like sisters. The more she told me, the more I wondered why I'd never heard of her before. If Susan had known Anne since they were children, why was this the first time I was meeting her? Many of her stories were things that I had heard before, so they tracked, but any misgivings soon melted away as we spent our evenings remembering. Sometimes she held me while I cried. Sometimes I held her, but it was nice to have someone there in my grief. She had just gotten done with a particularly funny story about how Susan had cut her hair too short and given herself something like a mullet before shaving it down into a sloppy pixie cut when she suddenly began to cry. Her despair was deep, the sobs racking her, and when I went to hold her, she pressed her face against my chest. "I'm sorry, I miss her so much." I held her that night as she wept, and I think that was when I started to fall in love with her. It made me feel terrible, but I couldn't help it. She was so much like Susan. Even her voice reminded me a little of my dead wife. I didn't want to move on. I was still trying to process what to do next, but Anne helped a lot, and I got the feeling that she didn't mind being that person for me. Suddenly, she was coming over every night, bringing food or wine, and we spent our evenings together. It didn't seem to bother her that I never wanted to leave the house. Didn't make any difference to her that I didn't cook, but the longer she was in my life, the more that changed. Suddenly I was paying more attention to my clothes. I was taking on columns for online magazines and selling my short stories again. I was cooking dinners instead of eating takeout, and I felt as if I were getting better. Anne was a big supporter of this, pushing me to get better, and that was when I started to notice that something was a little off about her, something I should have noticed before then. Anne only came by after dark and was unavailable during the day. Anne had a very demanding job, but would change the subject anytime I brought it up. Anne would always leave before dawn, if not well before. Anne wouldn't stay at the house, wanting her own space, which I could respect. These things on their own didn't seem so strange, but altogether they made me curious. I'd also wondered why Susan had never talked about Anne before. It was something that had always been at the back of my mind, but now it began to linger like a fishbone in my throat. If they were so close, why had I never met her? If they'd been friends since childhood, why hadn't she been at our wedding, at our parties, our trips, our gatherings of people that had been drawn around us? And Anne had never been seen at any of those. I asked Anne about that one night, and she waved it off, telling me I must have seen her at one of those things. I've been to every gathering you guys have thrown. I was at your wedding. I was at the funeral. I've been with you guys all the way. It made me think I was going crazy, but I couldn't remember seeing her before that night 2 months ago. I thought about going through old pictures, but neither of us had been picture-taking people. We kept our memories inside, not on our phones, though it made it a little difficult to check now. I was hesitant to bring any of this up in front of her as, well, I didn't want her to feel like I was accusing her of anything. Anne had become very important to me, and I didn't want to go back to sitting in my depression on the couch every night. That was until I saw something that I shouldn't have. We'd been watching a movie on the couch, something Susan and I had seen 1,000 times, and I dozed off towards the end. I had laid my head over on Anne, and if it bothered her, she gave no indication. I don't know how long we sat like that, the two of us together on the couch, but when she got up to leave, I came half awake as I mumbled something about seeing her later. She didn't respond, which I thought meant she hadn't heard me, but as I opened my eye a little, I saw something that froze me in my couch divot. The black shadow was standing in the doorway, its back to me as it prepared to step out into the dim hallway. The creature looked like tar, its form more of a feminine insinuation than a fact. It must have had its back to me, but when I inhaled sharply and fell off the couch, it turned back to see what had happened. I was on the floor, breathing harshly and trying to find enough breath to scream when the shadow creature bent down in front of me and spoke in Anne's voice. It's okay. This wasn't how I wanted you to find out, but I suppose it was inevitable. I couldn't find my breath. I looked at the thing that was speaking with Anne's voice, trying to make sense of all of this. What the hell was going on? In my head, I had wondered if Anne was some kind of stalker or a weirdo who was only pretending to know my wife, but this was a little bit beyond anything I had thought about. What? She glanced at the sliding door to our apartment, noticing the sun beginning to peek up and sucking in air. I don't have time now, but please listen. You have to trust me. I would never hurt you, and I'll explain what's going on. Some of the answers might not make a lot of sense, but I promise I'll tell you what's going on. Just wait till tonight, till I get off, and I'll tell you everything I can. Can you do that? I nodded, and she returned it slowly. She got up and walked towards the door, but turned back just before passing through it. I'm still Anne. I'm still the person you've known for the past few months. Just keep that in mind. She walked through the door and left me sitting on the floor of my living room. I was a mess all that day. I didn't understand anything. All I knew was that someone I'd grown pretty close to had turned into a featureless monster right before my eyes. I kept trying to convince myself throughout the day that it had all been a dream, that I was still dreaming, but the longer the day went on, the more I had to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't. That meant that whatever that thing had been, it was coming back here tonight. I'd have to make a choice when it got here. Did I let it in, or did I tell it to go away and lose Anne forever? When the knock finally came, night having crept up on me as I worried the day away, I looked out the peephole to see the same old Anne standing on my doorstep. As I opened the door, she breathed a sigh of relief and asked if she could come in. I let her in, figuring that if the creature had wanted to hurt me, it would have done it before now. "Okay," she said, not sitting as she paced the living room. "I know you've probably got a ton of questions, but just let me tell you my side before you jump to conclusions." She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she tried to find a place to begin. "I didn't lie. I have been with your wife for a very long time. In fact, I've been with her since she was born. Susan and I have gone everywhere together, right up until the day they buried her. I'm Susan's shadow." I squinted at her, not really sure what to make of that. "When your wife died, I was reassigned to someone else. Someone new. Someone very new, but I still remembered you. I wondered how you were and what you were doing. I hoped you were doing okay, and as this little person napped and ate and sat, I knew I had to go make sure you were all right. I had to stay with my new person during the day when the shadows are most noticeable, but at night I was free to roam a bit more. Babies don't move as much as you might think, and with a 7 o'clock bedtime, I was left with a lot of time to kill. I leave at 5 when the sun is coming up, and come back at night so I can see you." She stopped and looked at me in an expectant way, but my mind was altogether unprepared. "So you're Susan's shadow? How?" "Shadows are part of people, but once they're dead, we aren't really needed. I've been with Susan since the start, since the first time she met you, and I fell in love with you right alongside her. I had to know you were safe, to know that you hadn't given up, so I started coming back to our old house. I found you suffering. So I left you gifts to keep your spirits up, little things to make you realize you were still loved. But I got careless. I let myself get seen, but I guess that worked out in the end. Turned out I was hurting too. I missed Susan. I missed her more than I had any of the other people I'd been attached to before. And talking with you helped me get over her, just as it helped you. We helped each other in the end, and that was what we both needed. We became what the other needed, and I'm thankful that you happened along and found me that day. I had questions, all kinds of questions, but the one that stuck seemed the most obvious. If you have someone new that you've attached to, does that mean that eventually you'll have to go?" She nodded slowly, like she hoped I wouldn't think of that right away. "Eventually, as the person I've been assigned to grows, she'll need me more than just during the day. I may have to stay with her more and more often at night, and that will ultimately mean less time with you. I want to be here for you, but I don't want to stop you from moving on either. You need to get past her, get past me, and eventually return to life as you knew it. You deserve that. You deserve to be happy." I felt the tears leaking down my face, smearing her and turning her into a wavy half-person. Will you stay with me as long as you can?" I asked. She nodded. "I will. I'd really like that." That was 6 months ago. The little girl that she's become the shadow of, Anne, is starting to move around more, and Anne is happy with her progress. She doesn't think it'll be much longer before she's walking, but she promised that she'll come and see me for a while to come. One day she may decide that the nights are for going out and working, but for now, she's still tossing in her crib before the sun goes down, and that's just fine with me. I don't know how long I'll have Anne for, but I know it would never be long enough. Even as I write this, I know there will come a time when her visits become less and less, and I know that'll be fine too. I had Susan for 18 years, and I'll take whatever time I have with her shadow as a gift. I looked at the ad, unsure if my fever-addled brain was reading it right. Wanted, someone to infect me with the COVID-19 virus. Must be verified as sick, have paperwork verifying illness no older than 2 days from today's date, and be willing to allow me to spend time near them. Will pay $500 for 8 hours in your company. Contraction of virus notwithstanding. Please email me immediately, with an email address attached. I had only been infected by the virus for the last 3 days, but I had been affected by it for the last 2 months. I had been laid off from work after a drop in profits had caused the store to go into bankruptcy. My boss had been very apologetic, but he still hadn't been able to keep the doors open. We had all hit the unemployment line after that, but unemployment wasn't as good as overtime. I'll admit, I had been living a little outside my means, and the bills were starting to pile up. Getting sick had ended my job search, and $500 was going to go a long way to settling my debt and keeping the lights on. And all that for letting a stranger hang out in my house for 8 hours sounded like a dream come true. I contacted him, and he offered to come over that very night, cash in hand. We discussed hours. I'm a dedicated night owl, and he agreed to come over at about 6 p.m. His knock dragged me out of my stupor at around 5:45, and I staggered up to get the door. I didn't expect to be greeted by a well-dressed man in his mid-30s. I'd expected a weirdo, maybe some disease fetishist who got off on being sick, but this guy was surprisingly well put together. He wore black slacks, a button-down shirt, no mask, and his brown hair was close-cropped with a square pair of little gold glasses that made him look like a banker. He shook my hand, something no one had done in a while, and took an envelope of money out of his pocket. He showed me 5 crisp $100 bills, and then I led him into the living room. He sat in my armchair, leaning in close as I sagged back onto the couch and stared at me intently. "So, what do we do now?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just whatever you usually do. Watch TV, play video games, whatever. Hopefully my proximity will be all it takes to get the disease, and I'll achieve my goal." "I had wondered about that," I said, sneezing into a Kleenex and wincing as he leaned in closer. "This disease is supposed to be pretty bad. Why exactly do you want it?" "I'd tell you, but honestly, it would sound crazy," he said with a chuckle. I shrugged. "It's not like we got anything else to do but watch Netflix for 8 hours. Tell me, it'll make the time pass." He glanced over at my bookshelf, eyes roaming as though he was looking for something particular, before settling on and taking a paperback from the middle. It was a newer book, Fields of the Foregone, and he nodded as he inspected the spine. He must have liked what he saw because he smiled and held the book out to me. "I see you're a fan of my work. I'll sign it for you if you want, but my books are part of the reason I'm here." I squinted at him. Are you Timothy Corvin? The guy who writes the Ghostgrass series?" He nodded. "Yep, 3-time New York Times bestseller." I gaped at him for a few seconds before asking my next question. "Why the hell are you at my apartment trying to get sick?" He smiled, but the smile was sad. "You could say that the writing is why I'm here." He sat down again and made himself comfortable before telling me the strangest story I'd ever heard. "I got sick about a month ago. It came on quickly, cough, fever, typical flu-like symptoms, but I assured my agent that it wouldn't be an issue. I'd finish my latest novel and have it on her desk by the end of the month. First couple of days weren't so bad. I was still lucid, and I managed to get some work done. I was trucking right along, making good progress, when the real sickness hit. Suddenly I was feverish, scatterbrained, and I could hardly focus long enough to get off the couch. I spent my days in a stupor, high on cold medicine and barely coherent. My nights consisted of rolling around in a fever-fueled daze that made me question whether I was dreaming or awake. I had these dreams, you see. I say dreams because I can't remember them, but I couldn't do anything but remember them then. I would sit on the couch and mumble about them all day, reeling through their world as I tried to wrap my head around them. I raised an eyebrow at him. It sounds pretty bad. Sounds like you didn't get a lot done. Oh, quite the contrary. The longer I raved about the stories, the more I started to write about them. Not so much writing, I guess. I read through my notes the other day, and it was more like drunken ramblings. At some point, I moved on to chronicling them. I would come to at my computer, banging away at a story, not sure what I was doing or how long I'd been doing it. The stories were great, but they were so far outside of what I normally did that I couldn't wrap my incoherent brain around them. As the fever started getting worse, I would slip into these fugue states and just write for hours on end. One day I came out of one and found I had an email from my agent. I had sent her a draft for one of the stories. I was so worried. These stories were really weird, completely batty, and I was afraid that she would drop me as a client if she read what my fever-swallowed brain had cooked up. He took a sip from his coffee then, wetting his pipes, and my own fever-addled brain became a little impatient. So, what did she think? Oh, she loved it. She said it was the most unique thing she had ever read, the most unique thing she had read in ages, and wanted to know when I was going to be done with it. Reading through what I had sent her and the stuff I was working on before I got better, I can see what she was talking about. It is both similar to so many things and completely different. It's a timeless story that sits completely outside of the normal processes. It seems to contain two antagonists and no hero, a war with nothing but loss and stakes that don't seem to make any sense. It was almost Lovecraftian, and I found myself as interested in hearing how it turned out as she was. But that was where the problem arose. He looked at my glass of water longingly, and I slid it across the table to him. If he wanted to get sick, then more power to him. He was paying after all, so he might as well get his money's worth. He reached out and brought it to his lips, throat working as he swallowed. I tried not to gag. There was probably backwash in that. My meds were squashing the fever that was keeping my brain in its altered state of mind. I was always careful never to ride it for too long, but the high was more than a little intoxicating. I would time travel in those moments, starting on my couch and coming to at my computer as I finished more pages than I'd ever done. I throttled back on my meds a little, wanting to stretch this out for as long as I could, but eventually my body started to get better. My fugue states became fewer and fewer. I found that I couldn't tap into that hidden world, and the story wasn't something that I could just make up as I went along. It was unknown, unheard of, and my mind couldn't begin to tap into that place by itself. My agent was wild to have more, wanting an ending, wanting a sequel, and that's when I started thinking about contracting it again. I lifted an eyebrow at him. I know that's what brought you here, that's what you told me on the phone, but I still have a hard time believing that you want this crap. It's miserable. Between the headaches and the near constant fever, I seem to mostly exist in a state of misery. Some people are experiencing it even worse than I have. What if you get the kind that's really bad and you're hospitalized? It seems like that would put a damper on your writing. He shrugged. That's the thing. Even when I'm experiencing the same symptoms as you, I still get the urge to write. I don't know if it's subconscious or what, but my brain takes over and forces my body to keep writing. Maybe it's not even my conscious mind. Maybe it's this place, and I've been tapped when I'm in these fugue states. I've had this thing 3 times now, you know. If I had had water in my hand, I would have probably did a spit take. 3 times? My God, you rarely hear of anybody getting it more than twice. After I got better the first time, I was struggling to keep up, he said, suddenly looking far away. I tried faking it, but it just wasn't the same. My agent started to notice. She started to send my stuff back with notes like, I need more of the voice you had in the first draft. I started getting desperate. She told me that she shared my notes with some of her colleagues, and they were very excited about how it was all coming together. So I started putting the pieces together and decided that I needed to recreate the situation. You needed to get sick again, I said. He nodded. I needed to get sick again. I started slowly, waiting in hospitals and waiting rooms, looking for sick people, but I became desperate after a while. I got lucky the first time, a chance encounter with a sick friend. One trip to their apartment, and I was back where I started, feverish and coughing on my couch as I waited for the time skips to start. Did they? Would I still be running the ad if they hadn't? This time, though, something was different. This time I was treated to some of the most vivid dreams I've ever had. I wasn't just hearing about my two antagonists. I could see them. I watched them play their shadow games, maneuver their pieces, snatch territory only to lose it again. All the while I was chronicling them. It became a mania for me. I refused to take anything to dull the fever this time, but it didn't seem to matter. After a week, my fever was abating, and I was back to trying to fake it. But I couldn't fake it. I wouldn't even try. I needed the dreams. I needed the visions. I needed the writing fits that I never remembered. That was when I started running the ads. The lady at the paper didn't want to run them at first. She said I was sick, but once I offered to pay her triple the going rate, she caved. As I watched him talk about it, I reflected that he did look pretty sick. Not physically, but mentally, I mean. He looked like an addict describing his favorite drug. As he talked, he scratched at his arm, his face taking on a smiling rictus as he described the visions. I began to wonder just how this disease, or maybe it was the story that had affected him. I wanted to tell him to leave off for his own good, but I really did need the money. I've sunk nearly $5,000 into getting this disease. Did I tell you that? Every time I post the ad, someone responds. After so many, though, my body has built up antibodies to it, and every time I get it, it's a little less effective. The last time I contracted it, I barely had it for a week. I was so anxious to get any work out of it that I don't think I got more than 30 pages the whole week. 30 pages? I gasped. I was no writer, but that seemed like a prolific amount of work for a sick person. I know, what a disgrace. The first time I was nearly averaging 30 pages a day, but after the first time I never managed it again. You were getting that much a day? His eyes glazed a little. He didn't seem pleased with what he saw, and he looked at my popcorn ceiling. I see them constantly. I simply can't make sense of it on my own. I can't convey something like storms battling for supremacy, tectonic plates crashing against each other as they try to change the land. The fugues allow me to tap into something primal that could understand these ideas. My puny lizard brain just can't make anything out of it. You know, reading these things I've written, understanding only enough of what I've written, scares me a little. How much of your book have you written? I asked, not sure I wanted an answer. He scratched again, still uncomfortable, but wanting to discuss his drug of choice nonetheless. I've written 5 books. I've cataloged the lives of these two from the moment of their birth to the very last encounter they had directly. I gaped at him. He was talking about 5 books in what must have been a matter of months. I couldn't even consider something like that, and I began to wonder how large they were. The pages, the volume he was talking about per day surely meant that these were no small books. He didn't seem to understand where these stories were coming from either, which made them all the more mysterious and unknown. Can you tell me about them? He gave me a dead-eyed look, and I almost regretted asking. It's not something people really want to know in the end. This little experiment started as a way to write the next great fantasy series, but my agent stopped returning my emails about 3 weeks ago. The last 2 endeavors have been solely so I could learn how it ends, how we end. We? Humanity. We are the ultimate prize that these 2 creatures fight over. More specifically, they fight over the right to subjugate and entertain themselves with us. We see their battles as normal. We see their battles as nothing but the changing of the seasons, but they see them as nothing short of war. I can tell you, but you won't want to know once I'm done. I didn't really want to know anymore, but I felt like I had to know. In the end, my curiosity was stronger than my fear. He spent the next 10 hours telling me about the battle between the Green Man and the Pale Lady. He told me of their beginnings in Strange, their emergence, and their eventual exile, and how they came to be on this plane of existence in the first place. He told me about the Brandylow, the servants of the Pale Lady, and the numerous agents of the Green Man. He told me how this green warrior was worshipped as a pagan deity, how he took his sacrifices, and how he sought out those who ran. It's funny how 10 hours can seem like a half hour when someone is telling you about the eldritch deities that you never knew you wanted to know about. When the alarm on my phone went off, reminding me to take my meds, I realized that it was 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up. Timothy got up, checking his own phone, and seemed to realize that he'd been talking all night. "Seems I've gone over my time a little. Here, as promised," he said, taking out the money and handing it to me as he left. "Wait," I said, dropping the envelope and coming shakily from the couch. "How does it end?" He looked back and shrugged. "Hopefully I'll find out. If I do, I'll let you know." Then he left, and I wouldn't hear from him for another 3 months. Well, I'd never hear from him again, but he would make good on his promise. I felt better by the end of the week, my fever breaking and my headache getting better and better. I finally acquired a negative test and started looking for work again. I got lucky. The bar up the road was hiring, and they needed someone to start right away. They had only recently been allowed to reopen, and the bartender was working double duty as the barback to help out. Before I knew it, I was bussing tables and hauling kegs like an old pro. I enjoyed the work, though it wasn't something I'd ever done before, and it felt nice to get back to work after a long absence. Then, one afternoon, I was helping my boss open, flipping on the TV and preparing to tune in to one of the sports channels like I often did. That's when I saw the little squib on the news that made me stop. The city is mourning the death of local writer Timothy Corvin, who died of COVID-related symptoms in St. Graham's this morning. Mr. Corvin, the writer of the Ghostgrass series, is survived by his father and his older sister. Service will be held Tuesday for his friends and family at... I couldn't believe it. The guy had been in my house not even a month ago. Had I killed him? Had he contracted his fatal disease from me? I had to sit down. I didn't know what to make of it. My boss must have noticed that something was off because he tried to send me home, wondering if I still had some latent symptoms of being sick. I told him I was fine, though, and I went back to work. As I worked, I wondered if he'd discovered the end he was looking for. I got my answer in the mail a couple of months later. A package was waiting on the stoop. I hadn't ordered anything, and the return address was from Samantha Drummond. The delivery address was mine, though, so I brought it inside and opened it. Inside was a manuscript, bound in twine with no title across the surface. On the top of the journal was a typed note from Mrs. Drummond informing me of her package's purpose. "Hello. My brother requested that I send this to you after he passed. He was very adamant that it be placed in your care. All the best, Mrs. Drummond." I lifted out the journal, opening the front page and bearing a message written in a shaky hand. "I found the end. Let's hope it helps you after I'm gone. I've been sitting here looking at the book for close to an hour, not sure whether I should read it or just burn it. If the beings Timothy had talked about had been using his infected body as a mouthpiece, I'm not sure I want to open my mind to them. This book contains their history, contains their past, present, and future, and this knowledge was gained at the cost of a life. Will they come to infect me if I subject myself to this arcane wisdom? That knowledge scares me more than a little as I put the journal back in the box and carry it to my room. I decided to put it in the closet for now. Some things are better left unknown, I think. "Mr. Fuller." The tall man looked up through the curtain of greasy black bangs, and his face was equal parts good-natured annoyance and unshakable certainty. Detective Cutter liked the annoyance. Annoyed men could become angry, and angry men could make mistakes. But the certainty was going to make this exchange difficult. A man who was certain was a man who would play the game to win, and Detective Cutter was just as certain that this man was guilty. "Do you know why you're here?" Cutter asked, and he put the box down between them as he stood leaning over Fuller. He could not have done this if Fuller was standing. Of course, if Fuller had been any further into 6 feet, he would have been playing basketball somewhere instead of writing crime novels. Cutter was all of 5 feet, and only because his red Irish curls put him over the limit. He stood over Fuller now, though, not glowering, but not smiling, from a position of power that Fuller's certain and almost bright smile did not seem to understand. The game was over in the 9th inning, Holmes, and now it was all over but the crying. Fuller looked up at him like a professor looking at a bright pupil who's just broken the cardinal rule and asked a foolish question. "Don't you know?" he asked in a deep, cultured voice that made Cutter want to start slapping him. "I assumed that you must have after 2 officers came to my office to collect me." "Collect you?" Cutter snorted. "Mr. Fuller, you were arrested, Mirandized, and placed in an interrogation room. I'd say that's about as far from collected as it gets." "Come on, Officer Cutter. We both know that if you could charge me with anything, we wouldn't be here having this little chat right now." Cutter grabbed the chair next to him and spun it so he could lean against the back as he sat. It was a distinctly juvenile posture, but he accepted it as he settled in for the long match. He was tired, bone-weary from chasing this guy's shadow for the last 3 weeks, and he'd be damned if he'd let him slip away now. Marcus Fuller was going to answer for these murders if he had to sit here all week, and Cutter was settling in for the long run. "My captain likes you for this. Hell, I like you for this, and we have solid evidence that if you didn't pull the trigger yourself, then you know who did." Fuller just rolled his eyes. "And why would I want to commit murder? I'm a very successful writer with 2 Sunday Times bestseller noir awards. I live very comfortably, and I could easily retire from writing after my next book and maintain that comfort for the rest of my life. Why would I jeopardize that by killing prostitutes and thugs?" "Let's talk about that prostitute, shall we?" Cutter said as he reached into the box and took a thick manila envelope out. He flipped it open onto 2 pictures of a pretty brunette in her early 40s. The top photo showed her inviting guests into a newly opened Royal Casino, while the bottom was her being booked a few years before for solicitation. Her expression was the same in both photos, devil-may-care attitude with a side order of iron poise. Marjorie Dyer, the proprietor of Dyer Needs, was found murdered in her suite at the Seawind Resort. He flipped the page, and behind it were several shots of a glassy-eyed Marjorie, who was no longer poised or so devil-may-care. She lay naked across a hotel bed, with a long, angry cut from one ear to the other, and a thick collar of blood clotting around the wound, making it hard to see. Hotel staff received a noise complaint about 11, and hotel security found her that way at 11:30. He had hoped the grisly scene would shock Fuller. He had hoped for revulsion, hoped Fuller would turn green or be sick in the wastebasket, or even that he would appear excited by the photos and tip his hand in front of the detective. Instead, he studied them for a moment and then looked back at Cutter expectantly. "Very graphic, Officer Cutter. What does this have to do with me?" Detective Cutter reached into the box as he spoke. "The murder scene of Marjorie Dyer is nearly the same as the killing of Catherine Hoff in your book Hunter City." He removed a dog-eared paperback from the box, and Fuller didn't seem at all surprised to see it. "If you'll indulge me, Mr. Fuller," and before Fuller could protest, Cutter had opened the book to the paragraph in question. "Hold her, Jack. I'm about to send Regis a message." As the switchblade came to life, Kat began to struggle between Jack and Anthony. Her tears made black pools of her mascara, and when Hunter lifted her chin to look her in the eye, she had long tracks down either side of her face. He waggled the blade in front of her, and she cringed away as the steel glinted in her eyes. "Please, Glenn, please don't do this. We can make a deal. I'll work for you instead of Regis, but please don't hurt me." And she dissolved into shuddering sobs again. She stopped when Hunter pressed the edge against her throat. "It's nothing personal, Kat. It's just business." She sighed like a split seam as the knife parted her flesh and her blood poured across the swell of her modest breasts. When Hunter's gentleman released her, she fell back onto the bed with a kind of boneless grace. Hunter only spared her a final glance before he strode into the hall and left her alone in his makeshift abattoir. Fuller indulged him as he read, and when Cutter finished, he only sat expectantly. "What do you make of that, Mr. Fuller?" Cutter asked, when it seemed Fuller would not break the silence. "Seems like a fan of my work decided to reenact some of his favorite scenes. As I told you the first time you came snooping around my office, I was at a charity event that night. 12 people will corroborate that I was present until well past midnight. So unless I'm under arrest for writing a compelling crime drama, are you familiar with the murder of Gerald and Jamal Smith, Mr. Fuller?" Cutter cut him off mid-sentence. Men like Fuller hated to be cut off, and he felt confident that the act would unnerve him. It didn't. "I'm afraid I'm not," Fuller said, crossing his arms and appraising Detective Cutter with light disapproval. They were hired muscle for Selectman Kane, a local crime boss in the area, all three of whom also bear a striking resemblance to Boyle, Barker, and Regis Angel from Hunter Street. Fuller rolled his eyes and sighed deeply in his throat. Do tell. Both Gerald and Jamal were visiting a tavern below Kane's office when their drinks were spiked with Rohypnol. Both were large men, Mr. Fuller, and both had a lot of experience with guns, as did Boyle and Barker. Boyle and Barker, as you recall, were drugged by Glenn Hunter before he assailed the home of Regis Angel. Both sets were shot on the stairs as they tried to return to their boss. Their nerves dulled, they were easy prey for both Glenn Hunter and our current mystery killer. Then, of course, there's the nature of Selectman Kane's death. "Let me guess," said Fuller. "Drowned in the bath?" Cutter flipped through the file and settled it back on the table. "Close. Drowned in the sink." The photos were of a man in his late 50s, lying face up in a utility sink. His shoulders had been forced down into the wide basin, and his face was a spiderweb of cuts and scratches where the faucet had battered him. One of his eyes bulged grotesquely, as the other stared glassily at the photographer. Fuller looked at this with no more interest than he had the others, and when he looked up, his eyes questioned Cutter on what he hoped to accomplish. He didn't catch Selectman Kane in the bath. He was forced to improvise by drowning him in a utility sink. Kane fought, but forensics says his attacker finally broke his back and forced him down into the utility sink to properly drown him. That's not from one of my books, Officer Cutter, as well you know. No, but Hunter did drown Regis in a bathtub after killing his bodyguards in a stairwell. I got the passage somewhere here. He removed his copy of Hunter Street from the box as well. He turned to the back and saw Fuller wince as he bent the pages back to read the highlighted paragraph. That's more of a reaction than he had given to the entire photo album, Cutter thought, as his eyes found the spot. Hunter watched as Wagner's eyes went wide as he pushed through the bathroom door. Wagner reached for the gun in his jacket, but the little silenced pistol in Hunter's hand woofed softly. He felt the angry burn as the acoustics of the bathroom turned The Rise of the Valkyries into a cover for the loud, wet slap of the body as it hit the floor. Hunter entered the small door between the bathroom and the washroom unnoticed. As he pushed the large form of Regis Angel under the water, he was rewarded with total surprise. The old man was still quite strong, and had it not been for the surprise of the attack and the slippery bathtub in which he was lounging, Hunter thought that he would have been in for a real fight. As he drowned him, he bent over him so he could watch the life leave his eyes. If you watch a powerful man draw his last breath, some of his spirit will be transferred to you, boy. His grandfather had told him this 1,000 times if he'd told him once. As the struggling stopped and the great shadow of Regis Angel left the world, however, Hunter felt little save the deep sense of satisfaction and a staggering sense of loss. "You're reaching, Detective," Fuller scoffed, but Cutter noticed the change in title, and it seemed a victory, if a small one. "He was drowned on his back, Mr. Fuller, which leads us to believe his attacker wanted to watch him die." "Which supports the theory of a copycat," Fuller barked, pushing up from his seat to glower at Cutter. "Just because you beat this dead horse over and over again, Detective, does not mean it's going to give you anything but... Your third book was a bit of a disappointment, wouldn't you say, Mr. Fuller?" That shut him right up. He stopped mid-sentence and goggled at Cutter, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. If Fuller wanted to play the copycat game, Cutter was ready to drop his final bit of damning evidence. He was more than happy to let Fuller back himself into the corner first, though. Fuller blew out a long breath. "I don't see how that's relevant at all to your case." "A dozen rewrites, not well received by the fans, and the reception at the ending was bad enough that you had to write a fourth book and turn the Hunter trilogy into a Hunter quartet. That had to sting a little, wouldn't you say?" That was a decision I made on my own," he snapped, but Cutter didn't care. He had this guy, and he knew it. The first two pieces were only appetizers, and after he served up the main course, he'd be more than happy to give this guy his just desserts. "Well,
The most recent murder was very reminiscent of another scene from your book. Oh, please do tell. Someone kill a big stupid brute on the street with a machine gun? Poison a congressman? Maybe slit a whore up the... Cutter threw down an open folder and watched the pompous prick deflate like an old balloon. We had to request the manuscript from his secretary when we found out you had written a fourth novel. She was so distraught that she sent it over immediately. This, Mr. Fuller, is the reason you're here. Fuller looked far more unsettled by these photos than anything else that day. This can't be. I just talked to Dan last week. Danforth Wild was murdered in his apartment last week, 3 days after you threatened him over social media for stealing the premise of Hunter State for his noir series. You said you would make him regret every word he published, didn't you? I guess maybe he regrets it now, doesn't he? Fuller sat, looking at the pages for several seconds, before closing his eyes and sighing. He was eviscerated, just like the congressman in Hunter's stand. My agent was the only one who had a copy of the manuscript, so of course, you think... He closed the folder and glared at Cutter. Hook me to a lie detector, detective. Call my assistant and ask her where I was when Dan was killed. I have no receipts for travel, I have taken no leave from work, and you will find no way I could have done these things. Now, unless you're prepared to hold me under suspicion, I demand that you release me. Cutter stared at him for nearly a minute before shaking his head with a deep sigh. He had hoped he could grill the answers out of Fuller, but the guy was too slick for that. His captain was going to rake him over the coals for this one, and Cutter could already hear the sounds of pens signing his leave of absence. Go, then, he said, waving his hand at the door, and Fuller left with a little slam as the door shut behind him. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of suspension from duty. Cutter drained the whiskey from his glass and slid it back towards Mike. He had had his first drink right here at the Fighting Cock, and he suspected it would be where he took his last. You shake enough trees like he had, and you were bound to have something fall on you eventually. Guys like Fuller, though, they made him ache for a drink. The door jingled, and Cutter didn't even look up as someone plopped down next to him. They thought I might find you here, said a familiar, cultured voice. I need your help. Cutter blew a chuckle into his shot as he knocked it back. You dance around justice, get me suspended for 3 weeks, and expect me to... He flinched a little when he looked at him. Fuller had a long, jagged cut across his face, and his left eye looked like a few more punches would have broken the socket. He caught Mike's eye, and the barman seemed to be trying to decide whether to call the police or let Cutter handle this. In the end, he offered him a rag from behind the bar and slouched off out of earshot. Fuller sat down next to him, and his eyes darted towards the door like a trapped animal. I need you to protect me. The man who's been murdering these people has been staying with me for several months now. He's also responsible for the 4th Hunter book, and until tonight, I thought his killings were something benign, a way to clean up the streets, if you will. When I confronted him about Dan, though, he just went crazy and tried to kill me in my apartment. Slow down, said Cutter, as he took a pad from his pocket. Let me get some information first. He wobbled a little on his stool as the alcohol settled over him like a cloud. The shots were beginning to catch up with him, but he wanted to be sure he got everything verbatim. If he could bring this information to his captain, then maybe they'd rescind his suspension. Let's start with a name. Who tried to kill you? Fuller took a deep breath before saying the last name Cutter would have ever expected. Glenn Hunter.
When I was 8, I was abducted for about an hour. I know that's an odd statement, but trust me when I say, it gets weirder. When I was 8, a man abducted me right off the street. My parents and I lived in a shabby apartment about a block from my primary school. Since Mom worked days and Dad worked nights, I was responsible for getting myself to and from school since I was 6. I walked the same way home every day, and if someone was trying to snatch me, it wouldn't have been hard to learn my routine. So there I was, walking to school with my Power Rangers book bag swinging off my shoulder, thinking of nothing more pressing than the math test I hadn't studied for the night before. Suddenly, a white van rolled close enough to ruffle my hair with the side mirror of the van. Then a hand caught the handle at the top of my book bag and pulled me in. I struggled as the meaty hand lifted me into the passenger seat, but he pulled me up with little effort. He reached over and shut the door, his arm crossing right in front of my face. This would have been my opportunity to bite or kick or fight in some way before the van rolled on again. I found myself unable to react, though, frozen by the ease at which I had been lifted from the street. As we moved away from the curb, I glanced at my abductor as he sat behind the wheel. It's funny how your mind always creates a picture of a potential abductor. When the teacher talks about the strangers in school, I always picture a man in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that covers his face, a soft voice with a gentle nature. On all the TV shows I wasn't allowed to watch but did, child molesters were always these casual business types with vans full of candy and sweet smiles. This guy, however, looked nothing like the guys on TV. The man sitting next to me was large, gray, and scary looking. He looked more like the prisoners on the TV shows I watched when no one was paying attention. He had long, greasy hair that was graying in odd places, muscular arms connected to a barrel chest barely contained by his dirty sweater, and a pair of eyes that looked 1,000 miles away as he piloted the van on its course. I became terrified that I would never see my parents again, that I would never see my toys again, and that my parents wouldn't have anything to remember me by except the school picture I'd brought home last week. It's funny sometimes, the things kids worry about. "Don't worry, Mark. I'm not gonna hurt you," the guy said in a gravelly voice full of mucus. I stiffened in my seat. How do you know my name?" That was a stupid question. The man had probably been stalking me for weeks before making his move. He knew my name, he knew my parents' names, he knew my address, he knew the kids I played with at recess, and what time I took my first poop every morning. He had stalked me like a hunter stalks a deer, and now it was time to move in for the kill. "Because I am you." That took me by surprise. I had expected many things. I had thought maybe he'd say he was in love with me, to scream at me that he would kill me so I'd be scared so he could get off on my fear, maybe even that he would keep me forever, that he'd be my new dad, or I'd be his new son. I hadn't expected him to say that he was me. "What do you mean?" I asked, visibly confused. He stared straight ahead, seemingly unable to begin. I thought again about how he was probably going to hurt me and leave me in the woods somewhere after he'd killed me. That was what the killers always did on unsolved mysteries after they killed someone. I bet he had a shovel or something in the back. My 8-year-old mind could already see him carrying my limp body off into the forest to bury me in an unmarked grave. The dogs would come sniffing after me at some point, and they'd unearth a perfect little skeleton in a hole in the woods. My parents would cry and scream, just like the parents did on TV, and Robert Stack would ask the viewers to call if they had any information. It's funny, the places a kid's mind goes when he's in panic. "This is hard, kid. Now that I'm here, I don't know how to start." We sat in silence for a few more minutes before he found his words. "So, in 40 years, humanity cracks the secret to time travel." He paused again, unsure how to continue, before finally settling into a rhythm. "By the time they do, you will have spent 20 years of your mandatory 2 life sentences in prison." I turned to look at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "Prison? Why am I in prison?" He sighed, fishing a cigarette out of the cup holder, where he had several sitting loose. He pressed the lighter on the dashboard and put the cigarette in his mouth as he waited for it to pop again. "We've done some things we aren't proud of, Mark. We acted in haste, and now we have to contemplate at leisure. Let's just say that you took the easy way out one too many times, and finally, it came back to bite you. The old neighborhood claims us all eventually, Mark. You're living in a septic tank, and it's only a matter of time before you get pulled down into the shit." The lighter popped, making me jump, and he yanked it out and pressed the tip to the cigarette. He inhaled and turned back to look at me. "We don't have much time. Someone noticed me take you off the street. At least they did last time. And the cops are going to pull me over in about 10 minutes. You have to stop this from happening. You can't let the old neighborhood claim you like it always does. There are bad people there. People that will be responsible for your downfall. You have to get as far away from them as you can. You have to get away and never look back. If you stay, you'll be forever damned. Get out, Mark. Get out and live." The cigarette jittered in his lips. He was shaking me then, yelling into my face, shaking me as the cigarette's red end swam back and forth in his mouth. I felt my head getting fuzzy as he shook me,
and when the red lights started flashing, I thought it might be from all the shaking. He stopped then, turning to look back at the lights, and reached into his pocket to pull out a gleaming piece of steel. It was a gun, a big gun, and when he stepped out of the car and leveled it at the policemen, they seemed afraid. They weren't afraid when they shot him, though. They yelled at me when I climbed out of the driver's door, but I didn't care. I held his hand as he lay dying, his face turning to look at me. I could see that half his cheek was missing. His sweater was turning the color of autumn leaves, and when he spoke, it was gurgly and wet. He coughed a bright spray of blood onto my shirt, and I still remember how it stood out against the bright yellow as the cops came running towards me. "Get out, Mark. Get out before it's too..." By the time they got there, he was dead. My parents arrived shortly after I got to the police station. Mom hugged me, crying, and Dad wrapped himself clumsily around me as well. It was the first time in months that I could remember seeing them together. As they folded me into their embrace, I remember thinking that everything was going to be okay. I could avoid the scary man's prophecy and prevent the terrible fate that he was trying to warn me about. How naive I was then. That night, Mom and Dad had a terrible fight. Mom wanted to leave the neighborhood. She wanted us to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, until we could find a different place. She didn't feel safe here, not in a place where people just got picked up off the street and nearly kidnapped in broad daylight. Dad wouldn't hear of it. He had lived here his whole life. This was where his work was. She was crazy. Maybe she could just get another job somewhere, but he wasn't about to throw away 10 years on the job because she was scared. As I lay in bed, I realized that everything wasn't just going to be okay. I clutched my stuffed Ninja Turtle tightly as they continued to rage at each other in the living room. The next day, Mom came to talk to me. It was decided that Mom and I would stay with my grandparents for a while. It was also decided that Dad would stay at the apartment. A little while turned into the next 10 years of my life. My parents got divorced a year after we went to stay with Grandma and Grandpa. I went to see him a few times, but Mom usually insisted that he come to us. When I did go to see him, she came with me. She still didn't trust the old neighborhood, and the few times I went back, I saw that it had gotten worse. Gangs and drugs had taken over, and Dad had become a stranger to me. When the construction company he had been with for so long closed down, he joined the element around him. Mom wouldn't tell me what he was doing, but I'm sure he was making drugs. The next time I saw him, he looked like a zombie from a horror movie. His hair was thinning, his face was gaunt, and he smelled like a truck stop toilet. He told me to stay in school and make something of myself. He told me not to end up like him, not to let people I thought were my friends drag me down into something I couldn't get back out of. Whether he knew it or not, he spoke the words that the strange man had said to me when he told me to never come back to our old neighborhood. "It's a trap, son. The only thing it can do is ruin you." When his apartment burned down a few months later, Mom didn't even take me to his funeral. I was 15 by then, just starting high school, and ready for the rest of my life. My grandparents had money, the kind of money that I now understand my mom wanted. They gave both of us the best life they could. With my grandfather's influence, I got into private school after private school. My mother made it very clear that I wasn't to squander the gifts I'd been given, and I took her at her word. By the time I was 18, I was at the top of my class and ready to enter almost any college I wanted. College was where I met Tabitha, though. Tabitha was where everything changed. I enrolled in a prestigious college, but I won't sully their reputation by naming them here. They were proud to name me amongst their alumni when I first stepped into their halls of learning. I took to my classes much the way I had taken to high school classes. I excelled, was noticed, and was praised for my hard work. I made the dean's list and was invited to join the kinds of academic circles that would ensure I had my own level of influence when the time came for my children to attend school. I was as far from that sidewalk in my old neighborhood as I had ever been. Little did I know, I was much closer than I thought. Tabitha was a year above me. She was a film major I'd met through a friend, and I knew I wanted her from the first time I saw her. My friend Jace was not what you would call centered on his studies. Jace had been accepted on a sports scholarship, and I had accepted that he was a burnout who was here to party and meet girls. Jace thought it was the height of hilarity to get me to skip out on my studies and hang out with him and his other friends, and Tabitha was one such friend. It was she who brought me about to the return of my old life.
It all started because Jace was in my room, calling the person he bought drugs from. "Damn it!" he yelled, slamming the phone down and startling me from my work. "He won't sell me anymore," he sulked, drawing his feet to his chest as he sat on my bed. "Says my friends keep calling and coming by, and he thinks we're bringing heat around. Where am I supposed to get my Aether now?" Aether was a drug that was trendy on campus at the time. I knew it was amphetamine-based, but other than that, I had little knowledge of it. I didn't take drugs. I wanted to stay sharp, and other than the knowledge I gained from Jace and his friends, I was pretty ignorant of the whole culture. I was supposed to get some for the party tonight. Now I gotta show up empty-handed. A party, I thought. Maybe Tabitha would be there. I wanted to see her again, but if Jace wasn't invited to any more parties, neither would I. I thought fast and realized that I might not be as ignorant about the culture as I thought. Maybe I did know someone. I know a place you could get some drugs," I said, almost shyly. An hour later, we pulled up in front of my Uncle Randy's house. Uncle Randy was what I had always called Dad's friend Randall for most of my life. He and Dad had been childhood friends. Uncle Randy had been the best man at my parents' wedding, and I kept in touch with him a little after Dad died. His house had once been pretty, too pretty for a bachelor, Mom would often say, but now it looked run down and kind of creepy when we pulled up. Jace looked at me as if to say this was not how he was used to buying drugs, but I climbed out and told him to follow me. Randy was on the front porch, and he looked rough. He had clearly been cooking for quite some time. Burn scars and adult acne spotted his face. His receding hairline had been scooped back until the shiny pate drew attention to the greasy ponytail that hung limply off the back of his head. He looked like every internet troll you'd ever seen memed, but his Weasley eyes were full of dull hate and a bright hunger for whatever he could get from others. He greeted me warmly, but his eyes never smiled. We bought Aether from him, and were gone without much catching up or small talk. Apparently Uncle Randy did not have time for small talk anymore. The party was a huge success. Tabitha was there, and after Jace told them all how I had saved the party, she warmed up to me considerably. I didn't need the Aether that she puffed into my mouth with every passionate kiss. I was high enough off just being that close to her. She spent most of the party with her hand wrapped around mine, her body pressed against me. We were dating after that. I wouldn't use Aether. Just getting a contact high when we kissed was enough for me. She called it Aether hopping, and delighted in pushing the potent smoke into my mouth with every kiss. We started becoming very close. As we spent more and more time together, I tried to juggle my studies with the rush of my new girlfriend. I had always been too consumed by my term papers, or the collegiate essay, to have much time for a companion. With Tabitha, though, I felt happy in her distraction and full of her presence. Eventually, we graduated from college and moved into our own apartment. She got work as a columnist for a magazine, and I started work as an architect for a firm in the city. The money was good, we were both making enough to do the things we loved, and we found ample time to spend with each other. Tabitha kept her drug use under control, and I had broken myself of what little habit I had. Tabitha was enough for me, and I hoped I was enough for her. I was so naive. We'd been together about a year when she started spiraling. She said that she wrote better when she was on Aether. She certainly wrote more, but probably not better. The magazine she wrote for began to kick the articles back, not pleased with her work. This made her more self-conscious and made her use more. As the money stopped coming in, she still seemed to find ways to get Aether. She never asked me for money, and I could always tell when she was just going day to day, trying to find her fix. In hindsight, I should have realized what was going on. She began to be gone for long periods of time, always coming home tired and irritable. She was aloof and confrontational. When I confronted her about it, she became aggressive and often combative. I never knew what to do in these cases. She was so removed from the Tabitha I had fallen in love with, and I didn't know what to do with her when she became this venom-spitting demon. Afterwards, we always made up. She said how sorry she was, and promised she'd never do it again. Then we repeated the experience a few weeks later. The night she came home with bruises was really when I lost it. We fought, a screaming match like none we'd ever had, and she stormed out of the apartment. I heard her car start up and leave the lot. I just sat in our apartment, wondering what I should do. What I did in the end was follow her. I had often worried that her drug use might send her spiraling out of control, so I had installed a program on her phone that would let me track its location. I know this sounds invasive, but I was terrified that she might get lost or hurt, and I might need to find her quickly. Aether has some severe health risks, and the thought of her having a heart attack or something, and no one being able to find her, hurt me deeply. I wish, now that I had just let her leave, I followed her to the neighborhood. I followed her to Uncle Randy's house. Her car was parked outside. As I walked up, I could already hear a low noise coming from the living room. The lights were off, the living room curtains were drawn, but they were illuminated from behind by the glow of the TV. The door was ajar, one of her purple sneakers left across the threshold. As I pushed the door open, I could hear Tabitha's heady moans and could guess what was going on. Randall was her supplier. When she couldn't pay him, she had settled up in other ways. Now she was in his living room, paying with the only currency she had left. I'd like to say that I flew into a rage, but I didn't. I'd like to say that I blacked out, but I didn't. I remember everything with crystal clarity. I opened the coat closet and took out the shotgun I knew that he had there from childhood. It was loaded, as it always was, and Uncle Randy had kept it as clean and oiled as the day he had shown it to 7-year-old me. He told me it was for bad people that might want to hurt him. He told me it wasn't a toy, and I should never point a gun at anyone I didn't want dead. A lesson that came back to bite him that day. Tabitha screamed when she saw me framed in the living room door. She had been smiling a moment before, but now all the blood had drained from her face. She looked like the corpse she would soon become. Randy turned his head, that greasy tail swinging. He looked at me in surprise, and I leveled the shotgun at the two of them, my face a cold mask of indifference. Tabitha said my name, mouthed it before her perfect chest was a spray of blood, and the buckshot turned it into a pitted landscape of gore and viscera. Randy said nothing. The first shot had opened up the top of his skull, and he died instantly. She lay atop him, tears welling in her eyes as she fought for breath. She fixed me with those eyes as if to say, well, what else was I supposed to do? I didn't have an answer for her. I just dropped the gun on the worn rug and walked out onto the front porch to wait for the cops. I wasn't there when she died. I didn't hold her in my arms and tell her how sorry I was. I just sat on the porch and listened to her gasp out her breaths until they were muffled by the sound of approaching police sirens. I was convicted of a double homicide at the age of 22. I was given 2 life sentences, and I will never see the outside world again. Except, I guess I will. I don't know how old I'll be when the program makes me an offer. The self I met was old, but everyone over 20 is old to an 8-year-old. If I had to guess, I would say he was somewhere in his 40s, but that's just a guess. He told me I would be in prison for 20 years. I guess this is a fact that's set in stone. As I sit in my cell and think about my future, I often think about what he said. Someone saw me take you off the street. At least they did last time. That leads me to believe that he experienced this when he was a child. Maybe I always go back and try to warn myself, and perhaps I always fail. What if my life is nothing but a loop of trying and dying to keep myself from coming to Randy's living room and ruining my life? How long has this loop been going on? What would happen if I closed it? Would I simply cease to exist? I lay on my single bed some nights, staring at the roaches crawling across the ceiling, and think about the people who have brought me to this point. My mother, my father, my grandparents, Jace, Tabitha, Uncle Randy, and I somehow know what must be done as they all swim by. When it's my turn to step into the past, I don't think I'll explain anything. I might just take the gun out of my pocket and shoot myself as I sit rooted in the passenger seat and see what happens next. I've got 20 years to think about it, I guess. Plenty of time to work out the finer points of my own murder. I was looking for something to make my end of summer sleepover amazing. What I got was a sleepover that no one would ever forget. Margot, Jenny, and I had been friends for years, since kindergarten even, and we were getting ready to start 7th grade in a few days and wanted to hold our annual slumber party. I had the pigs in a blanket, the chips that Margot liked, the sour gummy worms for Jenny, and a huge bottle of Dr. Fizz for us to share. I was getting the movies ready when I realized I hadn't found our favorite game yet, and started hunting through the closet. We had played Mall Madness, a game my mom had given me from when she was young, and it was a hit at any sleepover. We would shop till we drop, charge it up, and then laugh about who had the best deals and spent the least amount of money. It was great. I had probably replaced the batteries in it a dozen or more times, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. I had always put it at the top of my closet, right beside my old Barbie travel case, but today it was nowhere to be found. I blew out in exasperation, wondering where it could be, but ultimately decided to go check the attic. The game had come from the attic after all, so maybe Mom had put it back up there. I pulled down the ladder, glad it was still daylight so it didn't look so spooky up there, and went to go look for Mall Madness. It was kind of a chore because Mom is something of a hoarder. Dad calls her a pack rat, and it seems pretty fitting. She keeps everything. She had clothes from when my sister and I were little. She's got art projects from when she was in school up there. And she had boxes and boxes of old photos and memory books, all kinds of things. I pushed aside a bunch of dresses and found an area dominated by old toys and games that she had saved. It was a mishmash of dolls and books and some old doll houses and a couple of dusty board games. I didn't find Mall Madness, but I found about 7 others. Apples to Apples was for babies, and Uncle Wiggily looked kind of weird. Don't Wake Daddy was missing pieces, some of which I'd lost, and Monopoly was just too long. I was about to give up when I saw a black box at the bottom of the stack that I didn't think I'd ever seen before. It was covered in dust, the letters barely visible, and I pulled it down, tugging it quickly so the other boxes wouldn't fall. I wiped off the cover and read the red lettering on it slowly, the red and black hard to read since it was so faded. Mystery Man, the name proclaimed, and I was about to open it and see the instructions when my mom called and let me know that my friends were here, so I ran downstairs to see them. I tossed the game onto my bed as I ran past, figuring we would check it out later, and we were soon all laughing and jumping as we got excited about the night. We ate dinner, we played hide and seek in the backyard, we hung out in my treehouse, and as it started to get dark, we came in to watch movies, play games, and start the rest of the evening's activities. Dad works nights, and Mom didn't really ever make us go to bed when we were having a sleepover. We usually passed out sometime around midnight, but tonight we wanted to stay up till we heard my dad pull in from work. We wanted to see if we could stay up till dawn, just to see if we could, and we had enough snacks and sugar to manage it, we thought. By 11:30, we had watched 2 movies, eaten most of the snacks, and drank half a bottle of soda, as we braided each other's hair during the end part of Balto. We were a little bored with movies, and Jenny asked if we could play Mall Madness for a little bit. That was when I remembered the game, and told them I had something different in mind tonight. The game had worked its way half under my pillow somehow, and when I pulled it out, my friends oohed and awed at it appreciatively. We opened the box and found a black board with silver spaces, the big orange phone in the middle having an honest-to-God spin dial on it. We had cards with descriptions on them, and it felt more like we were assembling a police sketch than a dream date. We would go around the board, landing on spaces and drawing cards, and when someone found a card with a number on it, we would dial the number, and it would help us determine the identity of our mystery man. "So it's a little like Dream Date then," Margot said. "Seems weird," Jenny said, "like we're hunting him or something." I looked at the instructions, but they gave no particular instruction on the purpose for making a description of the guy. We would take turns until we had assembled our mystery man, and then we would call 000 on the phone and give our description to the person on the other end. Somehow, they would know if it was right or not, and tell us that we had won, or tell us to try again. "Simple enough," I said, and I picked up the dice and rolled first. It was about 4 turns later when Jenny landed on a card that gave her a phone call. She dialed the number, but she was having some trouble until I showed her how the rotary phone worked. Mom had showed me, saying that That was how they used to call people a million years ago. And once she got the number plugged in, she held the phone against her head and waited for the click. Someone came on after 3 rings, a weird, staticky voice that I didn't much like, and whatever it told Jenny, she didn't seem to like it either. After a few minutes, she put the phone down, her hands shaking a little. "Well, what did it say?" Margot asked. Jenny cleared her throat, trying again to get control. I'm not supposed to tell anyone. The phone man said the call was just for me." She handed me the dice, her hands very sweaty and a little shaky, and we continued. It was my turn to use the phone next, but Margot pulled out a card and laid it down. The card let her steal my phone call, and I laughed a little as I stuck my tongue out at her. She dialed the number and held the phone, interested to hear what was to come. None of us thought it was real. Well, Margot and I didn't, but Jenny scooted a little away as she made her call. The voice picked up, and something quick and harsh made Margot's smile slip off her face as she listened. Her lips trembled as she put the phone down, and she wrote something on a piece of paper and shook her head when I tried to pass her the dice. The guy on the phone said to let you roll again. He said some other stuff, but I'm not supposed to say. I rolled again and grumbled as I landed just shy of a phone space. I wanted to hear what had them so spooked. This was a board game, ages 10 and up and all that, and there was no way it could be that terrifying. We continued taking turns, the girls wanting to keep playing, despite their obvious discomfort. Finally, I got my wish. I drew a card after landing on a spot, and it was a phone booth. Searched the deck for a phone card and dialed the number. I took the first one I found and dialed the number, letting it ring 5 times before someone picked up.
"Mystery man is blonde, about 6 feet tall, and a wide-brimmed hat. That's for your ears only, Toots. So don't tell any of those other little bitches what I said. I'll know."
That was a little weird, and I put the phone down with some hesitation. I didn't think they could say things like that in a board game like this. Margot and Jenny didn't bother to ask what he'd said, and I made notes as Margot took her turn. I had a blonde card and a wide-brimmed hat card, but I didn't have one that said 6 feet tall. I guessed I'd have to draw for it. Meanwhile, Margot had gotten another phone call, and as she listened, I saw her glance over at Jenny, and the look wasn't friendly. I didn't know what the phone guy was telling her, but it seemed to be making her mad. We played the game for hours, and in that time, the game got worse and worse. Anytime Jenny got a phone call, it nearly put her into tears. Anytime Margot got a phone call, it seemed to make her angrier and angrier. I tried to take the phone from Jenny at one point, offering to take the call for her, but she shook her head and told me the phone man had said that she had to take it, whether she liked it or not. "Yeah," Margot said, her eyes looking mean. "She needs to take her calls, just like the rest of us." As the game went on, we got more clues. I learned that my mystery man was a 6-foot-tall blonde in a wide-brimmed hat with a mustache, black pants, and a white shirt. I had most of that, but I was still missing the 6 feet tall with a mustache card. The man on the phone had alluded to the fact that Margot would soon make her move against Jenny, the two being like dogs ready to fight. And when Margot threw down a card, it looked more like a knife toss than a friendly showing. "White glove. I get to take one of your cards, Jenny." Jenny nodded, holding her cards out like a fan, and Margot picked the 4th one, pulling it back smugly before glowering at it. "You switched it," she accused, flipping it around to show Jenny a green sweater card. Jenny shook her head. "Nuh-uh." "Yes, you did," Margot accused. "The phone man said you were a cheater, but I didn't want to believe it at first. Looks like he was right." I never cheated," Jenny said, almost crying. "Then why wasn't this a green scarf card? The phone guy..." But she brought her teeth together hard, and it sounded like wood clacking together. What? I asked. What did he say? Nothing, Margot said. Doesn't matter. Just play the game. Jenny didn't look like she wanted to keep playing the game, but she didn't look like she was capable of stopping either. The game would continue, whether we wanted it to or not. And after that, the phone calls got even weirder. I pulled a card, dialed a number, and was greeted with about 10 seconds of heavy breathing before he spoke.
The mystery man has a long, sharp knife. He's walking down the street. Turn left on Martin Drive. I'll soon be there.
That sent chills through me. Martin Drive was 2 streets away. That was like an easy 20-minute walk. What the heck was this? These weren't pre-recordings. This had to be live, but that was impossible. The game was probably 20 years old at least. It couldn't happen. Look, I said, hanging up the phone, let's just call it a draw. I think this is getting a little too real, and... The orange phone rang, and I felt my words wither in my mouth as we just sat there and looked at it. It was like watching a bomb tick down, none of us wanting to be the one to touch it. It just kept ringing and ringing, and finally, to my surprise, Jenny reached out to pick it up. Her hands shook, her breath coming in quick gasps. She lifted it to her ear, and I heard someone snarl something as she winced like she'd been struck. She held the phone out for me, hands moving like someone with nerve damage, and said it was for me. I took it and held it to my ear and said hello.
Whether you play the game or not, you little bitch, the mystery man is still coming. If none of you wins, then he's coming to get all of you. But if one of you manages to win, then they might be safe. You never know. Better finish what you started.
I hung up the phone, trying to keep my teeth from chattering as I told them what he'd said. That's not true, Margot said. The phone guy told me that I had to beat Jenny, or I'd get taken. He said Jenny was trying to win on purpose so the mystery man would get me. Jenny burst into tears. He said that you two were trying to sacrifice me to the mystery man and that I deserved it. He said I was useless, just holding you two back, and I deserved to get dragged away. I thought about it, weighing what he had said. Sounds like if we all win, then he can't get at any of us. We have to work together to get out of this. Jenny shook her head. He said if I told you what my mystery man looked like, that he'd get me for sure. Me too, Margot said, the anger slowly turning into fear. Well, who cares what he said? He's coming regardless, so we have to do something. So we played the game cooperatively. Helping each other proved a better strategy, and Margot soon had everything for her mystery man. Margot dialed 000 and declared that her mystery man was 5'4" and bald, with a hockey mask and a machete and a white jumpsuit. The voice came from the rotary, making us all jump with its suddenness as it reverberated around the room.
You have discovered your mystery man, Margot. You are safe for now.
We were still for a moment. Then Jenny reluctantly picked up the dice and kept playing. She got a card, dialed the number, and choked out a sob as the man on the phone told her about her mystery man. He's on your street, she said, sobbing a little, and I rolled the dice so we could get to her turn again. White glove, I said. Let me see 'em. Jenny held up her cards, but she started nodding at one that was 5 into the stack. I drew it, and sure enough, it was the mustache. Now all I needed was the 6 foot tall and the knife. Jenny went again, drew a card, and breathed a sigh of relief as she dialed 000. My mystery man is 6 feet tall, dark-haired, with a rope and a long coat. The phone made the sound again before declaring,
Jenny, you have discovered your mystery man. You are safe. For now.
I picked up the dice when I heard something creak the door downstairs. It was long and loud, like a funhouse door at the carnival. I tossed the dice, moved my piece, and drew a card. It was a phone call, and I threw it away and rolled again. I moved, drew, and pumped my fist as I got the 6-foot card. I was rolling again when the phone began to ring. I let it ring, rolling and moving like a madman. I drew, but it wasn't what I needed. I got another phone card and threw it away. I could hear my mystery man on the stairs, moving as slow as any horror movie villain. I drew the gun and cursed as I tossed it away. I drew another white glove card, but I tossed it and kept rolling and moving. I could hear him on the stairs, his boots clumping menacingly. I had to find the knife. I had to banish the mystery man. If I didn't, it would mean my death. He came onto the landing when the ringing phone became too much, and I picked it up and put it down again. It started to ring after a few seconds, and I did it again before moving my piece. I could still hear his boots in the hallway that led to my room, and they grew louder by the second. Jenny and Margot were watching the door to my bedroom like it might explode, but I was focused on the task. Rope, toss. A wide-brimmed hat, toss. He was walking past my little sister's room now. He'd pass Mom and Dad's room after that, and then it would be down to my room at the end of the hall. What would happen if he got to me? Would they even believe Margot and Jenny? Would the mystery man leave them alone once he'd got me? I didn't know, but my heart leapt into my throat. I'd drawn the knife. I was done. I dialed 000 as soon as the door opened to my room. Jenny and Margot gasped, sliding away from the board and as far from the door as they could get. My mystery man has blonde hair, a wide-brimmed hat, is 6 feet tall, has black pants, a white shirt, and a knife. I practically screamed it into the phone, falling forward to cover it as I expected that long, sharp knife to stab into me at any minute. I heard the tone, and then heard the phone crackle again.
That was a close one, Heather. You're safe from your mystery man. For now.
I just lay there for a while, panting and trembling, as Margot and Jenny came to comfort me. They told me they had seen him standing in the doorway, his blonde hair spilling beneath his hat, and a sharp knife in his hand. He had raised it, took a single step, and then just disappeared into nothingness. We lay there, just kind of basking in the feeling of being alive, until I heard my dad pulling into the driveway. We had made it. We stayed up until sunrise, just like we wanted to. I went down and hugged my dad, who seemed surprised that I was still awake, but glad to see me, and then the three of us turned in. I put Mystery Man back in the attic, and have never touched it again. One brush with death was enough for me. So if you find a copy of your own while trolling through the thrift stores and antique malls in your area, be very careful with it. The mystery man you find might not be a mystery for very long.